I got it, cuz.
What the?
Got it.
You got what?
The clues all line up, man. I think I might know who. I think I might know who's responsible for those missing kids up in Pennsylvania in the 1840s.
What are you talking about, bro?
Man, I am talking about the Shadows of Spruce Hollow, the investigation of the Shadows of Spruce Hollow, uncovering the lost children of the Alleghenies. Today we're embarking on a journey into the heart of the Allegheny Mountains to unravel a haunting tale that has echoed through the annals of time, the story of the lost children of the Alleghenies. Our story begins in the remote village of Spruce Hollow, nestled amidst the rugged wilderness of Pennsylvania's Allegheny Mountains. It's here that we find the Cox family, a hard-working couple named Samuel and Susanna Cox, and their two young sons, George and Joseph.
Samuel and Susanna were salt-of-the-earth folks, known throughout the village for their industrious nature and strong sense of community. Samuel, a skilled hunter and farmer, provided for his family with unwavering dedication, while Susanna tended to the home and cared for their children with boundless love and affection.
George, who was 7, and Joseph, who was 5, were the epitome of childhood innocence, full of boundless energy, curiosity, and a mischievous spark in their eyes. They roamed the woods around their family's homestead, their laughter echoing through the tranquil valleys and towering trees.
The Cox family was deeply respected by their neighbors, who admired their steadfast resilience and unwavering faith in the face of life's challenges. They were pillars of strength within the tight-knit community of Spruce Hollow, their kindness and generosity touching the lives of all who knew them.
But as the fateful day of April 24th, 1856 dawned, the tranquility of life in Spruce Hollow would be shattered by a tragedy that would leave a lasting mark on the Cox family and the entire region. What's so funny, bro?
You said anal.
Come on, man. Get your head out of the gutter. Let's get back to it.
Sure thing. Before you give us an analogy of the story.
April 24th, 1856 was a crisp spring morning in the village of Spruce Hollow. The Cox family, Samuel and Susanna, along with their two sons, George and Joseph, had been tending to their day like any other.
According to an interview of Sarah Cox Daughtry, the youngest child of the Cox family, who was just 4 years old at the time, the family had just sat down for breakfast when the family dog began barking and then began running off the porch and up into the woods. Samuel, a skilled hunter, recognized the dog's erratic behavior as likely chasing game. He made mention to Susanna that he believed the dog had ran after a squirrel and then rose from the table, grabbed his hat and rifle, and then set off after the distant barking sounds of his dog.
As the morning slid into afternoon, Susanna was busy tending to the home, her hands busy with the tasks of the day. The boys, George and Joseph, filled with youthful energy and curiosity, ventured out to play shortly after their father had left. Not concerned, Susanna continued with her chores among the silence, assuming the boys ran after their father to help with the hunt.
As the hours passed, the innocent joy of childhood exploration would give way to a mother's worst nightmare. When Samuel returned with a dog and some fresh-caught game, it became quickly apparent that the boys had never met up with their father in the woods and hadn't made the trek back home.
Samuel and Susanna began trekking back into the woods, yelling, "Georgie, Joey," the nicknames of the boys, according to their younger sister. But no voices called back and no boys came running back home. But as day wore into night, they began to realize with a sinking feeling in their heart that George and Joseph were nowhere to be found.
Panic-stricken, Savannah and Samuel rushed to inform the local neighbors of their son's disappearance, their worst fears looming large in their minds. A search party was formed, with lit torches and a body of nearly 100 men and women who joined in to locate these missing boys.
In that moment, the tranquility of the Cox family homestead was shattered, and the search for George and Joseph Cox continued throughout the night with no success. As the day broke, the search would grip the entire community and later a nation in a desperate race against time.
So what was the population of Spruce Hollow in 1856?
It was about 50 people then. It only began seeing frequent European settlers around 1847, so it wasn't exactly a big bustling town.
So over 100 people searching the mountains was a pretty big deal then.
Oh yeah, for them, yeah, it was. Many people from the communities that surrounded this area, they all joined in on the search, and news spread like wildfire, and people gathered en masse to come help.
So they stopped the search to go to church?
What did I say about church?
You said they grew en masse.
I didn't mean that, man. I mean numbers. They had large numbers of people that came. I don't think they were even Catholic anyway.
Well, why didn't you just say that?
As news of the boys' disappearance spread like wildfire throughout the village of Spruce Hollow and beyond, it fired up the entire community to rally together in a desperate bid to find George and Joseph. With each passing moment, the search party swelled in numbers, as neighbors and strangers alike abandoned their daily tasks to join the monumental effort. By midday of the second day, approximately 200 men had volunteered to comb through the dense forest and rugged terrain in search of any sign of the missing children. Practically every able-bodied man and woman in the county.
For days on end, thousands more descended into the small Pennsylvania town to provide assistance while the relentless search continued. The men scoured every inch of the wilderness, leaving no stone unturned in their quest to bring Georgie and Joseph home. From the valleys to the mountaintops, from dawn till dusk, the search party pressed on, fueled by the hope that they might yet find the lost children alive.
According to newspaper accounts from 1875, the Cox family employed the service of a local freedman who claimed to have the ability to find the boys using dowsing rods. But after only a few short hours, the other search members concluded that the old fellow would lose himself in the woods if left alone long enough, and quickly sent him away, abandoning the idea.
By day 4, Susanna Cox reached out to a local woman residing in the neighboring Somerset County who was said to possess supernatural powers. For the next 2 days, the woman led the search team using her black art tactics, as they were referred to back in the day, but again came up empty-handed.
As the days began to pass by, hopes of finding the boys alive slowly began to diminish. The narrative also began to change from community support of Samuel and Susanna to skepticism and thoughts that they may have had something to do with the missing boys.
It became a thought by many in the town that the parents may have killed their very own children and disposed of them in order to garner notoriety from the town and financial assistance. Wait a minute. Dude, that doesn't make sense, or it's not rational. The parents would kill their 2 young boys, then call out to the town to come look for them days on end, the whole time knowing that they were deceased?
Man, you gotta know it sounds crazy, but you gotta think about the times, man. Life was really rough. People needed food, and a helping hand from a small community of people would really go a long way for a poor couple.
It just seems unfathomable to me that a couple of parents would do something like that.
Yeah, I know, but man, I'll tell you what, this story gets way stranger.
Stranger than trying to find a pair of missing children using dowsing rods in a medium?
Well, let's talk about Jacob Dibert. While the search for George and Joseph Cox consumed the village of Spruce Hollow, a lowly farmer named Jacob Dibert, residing in the nearby town of Claysburg, would soon find himself thrust into the heart of the unfolding tragedy.
It was in the hushed whispers of the townsfolk that Jacob first learned of the disappearance of George and Joseph Cox, a tale of sorrow and despair that stirred something deep within his soul. Jacob was mentioned as telling his wife Sarah how he fantasized of dreaming the boys into existence, locating them in his sleep, and then being able to help the communities find them. Then, according to record, that's exactly what happened.
10 days had passed since the boys went missing in the mountains with no sign of them. Jacob fell asleep on that night and dreamed of walking through the woods, crossing a log to get across a swollen creek, before finding a winding trail that led him to the boys, who were coupled together in the roots of a tree. According to accounts, he awoke startled at the dream but decided not to tell anyone about it, as he just assumed it happened because of the statements he made to his wife the evening before.
But night after night, Jacob found himself continually haunted by vivid dreams, each one leading him on a surreal journey through the rugged wilderness of the Allegheny Mountains to eventually come to the bodies of the missing boys. After the 3rd time the dream came to Jacob, now more vivid and compelling than the last, he could ignore its call no longer. With the weight of his dream heavy upon him, Jacob resolved to heed their cryptic messages and finally spoke about them to Sarah.
According to the account, Jacob's dreams were always the same, but each time he recounted more details. As of the last dream he had, he remembered starting out roughly 2 miles north of the Cox family house, and upon entering the woods, headed straight up the mountain. Along the way, he discovered broken branches, where someone or something had tore a path through the thickets. He followed the path until he came to a large tree laying over a swollen creek. He used the tree to cross the water, then after a short time later he came to an animal trail, which he turned right and began to follow. About a quarter of a mile up the path, he came across one of the boys' red shoes laying near the trail. As he ventured further up the trail, he came across the carcass of a dead deer that had been dead at least a few months. He then went up the hill from the animal trail, and after a few hundred yards came across an impressive birch tree with thick hardened roots and a stunted top that was either broken or deformed. As he peered into the opening, he saw the bodies of the two boys holding each other in the notch of the tree.
After hearing Jacob's story, Sarah suggested he tell it to her brother, Harrison Wysong, to which Jacob did later that day. After listening to Jacob recount the details of the vivid dreams, Harrison and Sarah decided that they needed to make the trek out near the Cox family residence some 15 miles away to see if any of his dream may be true. Oh, okay, wait a minute. So you mean to tell me that this guy is serious about this? He thinks that he can manifest the location of these boys from a dream that he had, and they're going to find them? Even though literally thousands of other people searched for over 2 weeks all across the mountains and couldn't do it.
Yeah, he does. You should know that according to the records, Jacob stated that he had never been on that mountain. He never knew anything of its terrain or what the Cox family homestead even looked like.
So he's just going to show up to a grieving family's home, Long Island medium style, and just make his way in to make them believe that he knows where their children are?
Yeah, man, but if you think this is crazy, you better hold on, because this investigation is about to take a crazy turn. On the fateful day of May 8th, Jacob Dibert, accompanied by his brother-in-law Harrison, arrived at a location near the Cox residence, which was just south of Bob's Creek, and ventured into the wilderness in search of any evidence that his dream was grounded in reality.
Harrison was recorded as stating that he was mostly there for support of Jacob, so that he didn't approach the Cox family or any of the searchers alone, making him seem to be crazy. But as Harrison accounted, the story told by Jacob began to take on a more ghastly reality than he could have ever thought.
Only after a few minutes of entering the woods, Jacob came across a thicket of brush with a worn trail of broken branches, just like he had stated in his dream. Jacob and Harrison made their way through the trail to come across a large flailed tree laying across the creek, just like in his dream. As they crossed, Jacob, as if he had been on that mountain many times before, cut straight up the hill. Harrison explained to Jacob that he felt that they were too far, nearly 4 miles away from the Cox's residence, too far from where the boys could have traveled. But according to Harrison's account, Jacob insisted that this was all in his dream, and he kept forging ahead. After less than a mile further in, he abruptly turned right onto a worn animal trail. To the astonishment of Harrison, after a short walk up the trail, they came across a small red chute. Up the trail a little bit further was a deer carcass, just as Jacob had explained he had seen in his dream. Jacob cut straight up the hill from the deer carcass, and Harrison followed. To his shock, just a short distance from the trail, they came across a massive hollowed-out birch tree with a stunted top, just like Jacob said they would find. In the shadow of the tree, among the roots, Jacob Dibert found the closure that had eluded the village of Spruce Hollow for so long. Cradled together were the emaciated bodies of George and Joseph, George holding tight to his younger brother, who was wearing a single red shoe.
So wait a minute. How's it even possible that they could just walk right up and find the bodies of these two children after thousands of people had scoured this entire mountain looking for them for days?
Yeah, well, according to the records, the search party failed to cross the creek as it was severely swollen with snowmelt, and they believed that if the boys had tried to cross that creek, they would have drowned. They actually searched the creek for miles looking for the boys, but they never crossed it.
Oh, okay, so the fact that they failed to cross the creek, but with thousands of people yelling for the boys, they couldn't hear that and respond? I mean, you actually expect us to believe that Jacob figured all of this out because of a dream he had?
I'm not saying that at all, man. You see, this is where the closure of the missing children of the Alleghenies might end as far as the records go. But the story and the legacy of Jacob Dibert begins. According to Sarah Dibert, Jacob had never before experienced a phenomena like the dreams he had told her about on May 8th of 1856. Shortly after the Cox boys were discovered, Jacob enlisted in the Union Army and perished just 6 years later while stationed in Virginia.
But just because his wife stated that Jacob had never spoke of such visions didn't mean that he hadn't experienced them before. As alarming as it was, his father, Captain Frederick Dibert, took part in the War of 1812, and according to Lieutenant Samuel Flynn, who was part of Dibert's company for 18 months, he stated that the captain would take on spells where he would act out in vengeful rage in both encampments as well as in public areas. He would later refuse any acknowledgement of his deeds. On one specific occasion, on September 15th, Flynn recounted that he witnessed Captain Dibert awaken from a deep sleep, grab his bayonet, and then proceed out of the barracks. Flynn and 2 other members quickly gave chase, assuming the captain had heard British forces. They came across the captain, though, stabbing a dog tied to a tree to death. After calling upon the captain, He gave no response, only lowered his weapon and marched directly back into the barracks to return to bed. In the morning, an inquiry was made, but the captain refused to admit any knowledge of the occurrence.
Jacob himself had a prior history as well. As a child residing in the town of Emlertown, Pennsylvania, Jacob, 12 years of age, attempted to strangle the boy who had been teasing him in town. When Jacob was approached by a local and pulled off the boy, he flew into a fit of rage, fighting the adult, then running home. Days later, he recounted this to his mother as a dream he had and explained how it all seemed real. His mother assumed this to be nothing more than a nightmare resulting from her son being bullied. That was until days later when he recounted being in town and a local man at a grocery store brought up the story, which then she realized it to be fact.
So it's possible then that Jacob knew where to find the boys because he was the one who placed them there. I mean, did he have an alibi at the time of the children's disappearance?
I mean, possibly. As far as an alibi, it was simply based on his distance from the Cox residence. He lived about 15 miles away, which would have been a solid day's journey just to get there back in that day.
So where were the boys eventually found?
They were about 6 miles away from their home, towards the town of Pavia, where Jacob resided.
So, was an autopsy not performed on these children?
No. The local coroner's report noted that the children's bodies had deteriorated badly, but not really through the decomposition. It was more through relative malnourishment. And although they were bruised and their clothes were ragged and torn, it was deemed that they perished due to starvation and exposure. Additionally, the report stated that the date the boys would have likely passed coincided with the day in which Jacob had his first dream.
Well, Jacob sounds a little sus, cuz.
Yeah, he does. But there's more about him and his family. Jacob served 6 years in the military, fighting for the Union during the Civil War. There are 3 separate accounts tying Jacob to locations where murders of civilians had taken place, mostly young boys. Although Jacob Dibert was never seen as an evil person, the coincidences, or at a minimum his location near several more young children's deaths, paint him as a potential suspect to the deaths of George and Joseph.
Moreover, he apparently passed his second sight to his son Isaac Dibert, who in 1887 dreamed about the location of a woman from Pavia, Sydney Griffin, who had become lost in an area known as Cedar Swamps. The searchers couldn't find her, but Isaac, after his dream, was able to lead them to her. She was found alive. She recounted a man who had abducted her and after assaulting her, left her in the wooded region tied to a tree exactly where she was later found.
Man, I think it's plausible evidence that Jacob Dibert had something to do with the disappearance of the Cox boys.
And I think it's possible that the whole family may be hiding a hereditary secret that's linking them to the deaths of several people throughout the entire century.
So what do you guys think? Is it simply coincidence that Jacob found the children due to a vision, or was he the one that placed the boys there later to return to find the bodies?
Well, could he have inherited schizophrenia from his father and then passed it along to his son?
It's interesting, man. It's probably best not to speculate, though. I mean, this is a really old case. Probably never really going to find out. But we really need some more clear evidence on that before we can make an assumption. Hey, what are you doing?
I'm asking Jacob Dibert for a question.
You know, dowsing rods are copper, man. That's not really cool.
Why? I'm trying to investigate, cuz.
Then if we're going to have to investigate further, let's have the audience decide.
Hey, that's a good idea. Hey, if you'd like us to travel out and explore the lost children of the Alleghenies, why don't you comment below?
And if you like hearing the background of these investigations, hold the like button hostage and share your thoughts on social media.
And if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so. That way you keep up with all of our latest content and updates.
That's it from here in the Uncovering History studio.
Thanks, and have a great night.